Welcome back to Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. I'm Jack Llewellyn. Thanks for joining me. It's been a couple of weeks, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But I apologize for not having gotten an episode out recently. Today, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to look at two recent news items and discuss those in a little bit of detail. Not a lot. But a little bit. And then I want to talk about this podcast and a few things that are going to happen going forward. So with that, let's first talk about Trump, the military, and cartels. The New York Times, a week or so ago, came out with an article. They were the first ones to kind of break this story that said that President Trump had secretly signed a directive to the Pentagon to begin using military force against certain Latin American drug cartels, specifically those that the administration had deemed terrorist organizations. And of course, we've talked about those terrorist organization designations and things in the past. The article went on to say that it is unclear what White House, Pentagon, and State Department lawyers had said about the new directive, or whether the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel has produced an authoritative opinion assessing the legal issue. That legal issue, of course, is it allowable for the U.S. to use military force, military troops in a foreign jurisdiction, particularly here, Mexico? Lots of issues that come up with that. We've talked about some of those in the past. In follow-up articles, people have said that, in fact, despite this order, the Trump administration isn't really considering sending troops into Mexico. Instead, the Washington Post quoted a U.S. official as saying that others in the administration are favoring things like drones or naval strikes if forceful action is in fact approved by the administration. And kind of this renewed effort to discuss, partnering more closely with Mexican authorities, the Mexican military, to target criminal organizations. Of course, this garnered some type of response from the Mexican government, including President Sheinbaum, who again reiterated that Mexico doesn't want to partner with U.S. troops on Mexican soil to go after the cartels, but that she looks forward to more cooperation in the anti-cartel efforts. But then she also made it very clear that any insurgent by the U.S. military into Mexico would be an affront to Mexico's sovereignty, would be illegal under international law, etc. When people started to look at this directive and its focus on Latin America as opposed to Mexico, some began to think that really what this wasn't so much a directive against the Mexican cartels as it was an effort to go after Venezuela. So if you remember, a few weeks ago, the Trump administration added the Venezuelan Cartel de los Soles to the list of global terrorist groups. In addition to that, it said, it being the Trump administration, argued that President Nicolas Maduro and others in the Maduro administration lead the cartel. It also drew a line between Maduro, the De Los Soles cartel, and the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico and claiming that Maduro had high-level contacts in or affiliations with or otherwise was involved with CDS. This also came at about the same time that Attorney General Bondi revealed that the reward for information leading to the arrest of Maduro had increased to $50 million. So many people speculated that this is really an effort to go after Maduro, and that the order, with its focus on Latin America, was really directed to that country, to President Maduro, and that we may see action taken against Maduro, including airstrikes or things of that nature. On that front, the Colombian President Gustavo Petro said that he would consider any attack by U.S. forces on Venezuela as one against his country as well, for whatever that's worth. Then tonight, Defense Secretary Hegseth was on Fox News, no surprise, and he was playing cagey about whether or not they being the administration, would ever consider sending troops into Mexico, and essentially said, well, I'm not going to tip my hand and ever say if we would or we wouldn't. Okay. So that's the one item out there. The second item I want to talk about is actually a couple of weeks old. Again, I apologize for that. But the Department of Justice announced that it was not going to seek the death penalty against 3 principal defendants in custody in the United States linked to Mexican cartels. That would be El Mayo, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, and Rafael Caro Quintero. Now, what does that mean to everybody? First of all, it should be pretty clear that if the death penalty is being taken off the table, plea agreements are being worked on, and there is a reasonably high level of confidence that those plea agreements are going to bear, or plea agreement negotiations are going to bear fruit. In fact, it's interesting. When the report came out, attorneys for El Mayo and Caro Quintero were both quoted. One of Caro Quintero's attorneys, Elizabeth Macedonio, said she and her client, quote, look forward to resolving this matter quickly to bring closure to all parties. El Mayo's lawyer, Frank Perez, said the government's decision, quote, marks an important step toward achieving a fair and just resolution. Now, I'd like to talk about that for a second. And I want to focus on Caro Quintero, though I think what I'm going to say applies with equal force to El Mayo. When Ms. Macedonio, who again is representing her client, so I have no issue with this, but when she says to bring closure to all parties, that is complete and utter crap. Who doesn't get closure in this situation? If there's a plea agreement, and again, I'm operating under the assumption that there's going to be a plea agreement, who doesn't get closure? Kiki Camarena family. That's who doesn't get closure. Who doesn't get closure? The DEA who investigated Kiki's abduction and murder in the immediate aftermath. His friends, his co-workers, the FBI agents, the DEA agents who went down to Guadalajara from all over the United States, many of them never having been to Mexico before, to try to find Kiki Camarena. Do they get resolution? Do they get closure? Of course they don't. What would bring closure? That would be putting Caro Quintero on trial for Kiki Camarena's murder. That would be closure. Now, you may be saying, well, there could be closure another way. Maybe Caro Quintero is going to provide information to the government that they can provide to Kiki's family, and that will mark closure. And that's possible. But what do you think Caro Quintero could say at this point that would bring, quote unquote, closure? And what could he say that would make his friends, his family, his coworkers feel better about the situation, feel like they had closure? What could he say that would be better than seeing him on trial? Now, I thought a lot about this, and I'd love to place this all at the feet of Hector Berreyes, because I've said over and over and over that I think one of the reasons the government was never going to try Caro Quintero for Kiki's murder were the things that Hector Berreyes and his witnesses have said publicly over and over and over that make them highly unreliable witnesses. But I think it has to be more than that, right? I mean, let's think about the last couple of weeks, for God's sakes. What do we know? We know a video's not going to get the death penalty, right? He's entering into a plea. Who knows exactly where he is? El Mayo's entering into a plea. Carrillo Fuentes is entering into a plea. Caro Quintero's entering into a plea. Wasn't the principle at one point you can get a plea agreement if you give us something important? Do we have any idea what important information is Caro Quintero going to give now? How much does he really know about El Mayo's operation, such as it is in Mexico now? What does he know about CJNG? What does he know about Los Chapitos? If you want to get information from Caro Quintero, have him on the witness stand, or at least do something publicly to say who else was behind the murder of Kiki Camarena. Who in the Mexican government was involved? Give us evidence of that. Who else knew? Who else interrogated Camarena? Right? Go back to Hector. Remember, he's the one who's out there saying, God, it was Felix Rodriguez. It was the Cuban. All right, let's have a place where we can find out if that's the case. Now, again, keep in mind, of course, if he was tried, he wouldn't necessarily have to testify, but that would be part of a defense, perhaps, and that creates all kinds of issues. And so think about that. All right, let's put Caro Quintero on trial. You have to prove the case, right? So you put on the witnesses and you try to make the case, and the defense would try and poke holes in the prosecution's witnesses, including Godoy and Lopez Romero and maybe Lira and who else they might be able to get together. And then what are you going to do? You're a defense witness or a defense lawyer. You're going to put Hector Berreyes on the stand, aren't you? And you're going to say, didn't you say that Felix Rodriguez, acting for the CIA, was involved in the interrogation of Agent Camarena, perhaps even responsible for the kidnapping and interrogation. How does that go over on the local news every night? We've talked about this before. I could spend a week cross-examining Godoy and Lopez on things that weren't available in the 1991 trial of Ruben Zuno Arce. 92, sorry. So anyways, what's interesting now is the government apparently feeling it's in their best interest, for reasons we don't know, to enter into pleas with El Mayo, Carrillo Fuentes, Caro Quintero. And what we don't know, that we should know as citizens, as taxpayers, is what benefit is the government getting by doing this? What benefit is derived from these plea agreements other than not being publicly humiliated when you put one or more of these people on trial? All right, that leads me into wanting to talk about the podcast. And this is going to be the last episode for a while. I'm going to go on what I'm calling an indefinite hiatus. I have, as somebody close to me said in a very sweet way, I've got a lot of spinning plates at the moment, and I'm going to try and take away a couple of the plates in order to focus on a few other things. I love doing this podcast, and every single person who's ever reached out and said that they enjoyed an episode or wanted to know more information, I remember each and every one of those and treasure all of it. But there are certain other things that I need to focus on, including, by the way, things directly related to everything we've been talking about on this podcast. So my research into the Camarena case is not stopping. My efforts to hold people, including Hector Breyes, accountable is not stopping. My interest in the Mexican cartel system is not going away. It's just that I'm not going to talk about it in detail every week or so on this podcast. But one of the things I'm going to do is do more of a news update, highlights, shorter clips on the Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena YouTube site. So look for news updates there. You can, it's pretty easy to find. It's going to be a little bit different than the ones we did on that channel in the past. A little less flashy, but a little more substantive. So we'll try to do that. Also, if you want to keep up with things that are going on with me, including my second book, which I've talked about, Someone Had to Lie, which deals with the cartels, the CIA, fentanyl, those things. I'm also will have a third book out. Not exactly sure when, but a third book that will be my effort to tie a bow on some of the major issues regarding the Camarena case. So you can look for that at llewellynwriting.com. So I'm not going away. At some point, I know I'll come back to this because, as I said, I enjoy the hell out of it. It's just I need to focus on other things. And as you may suspect, This podcast, unfortunately, is not how I make my living, and so I need to make sure that that the people I work with and for are feeling like they're getting their money's worth from me as well. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, not forever, but for a while. If people have any interest in reaching out and letting me know whether they think they're valuable things, or if doing periodic ones on here would be good, let me know. Let me know your thoughts. As I say, I thoroughly enjoy this. I appreciate every single person who's listened to any podcast episode. And I look forward to talking with you all again at some point in the not too distant future. But until then, that's all for Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. Thank you all. Have a good night.